Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of XYZ Podcast in collaboration with SKH Festival. Sorry, I need to start again. I can't remember.
SKH Arts Festival.
Sai Gong Hoi. Okay, sorry, one moment.
Yes,
Okay.
High Arts.
Okay, so three, two, one. Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of XYZ Podcast in collaboration with Saigon Hoi Arts Festival. I hope you enjoyed the first episode that I did with Alan from One Bite. And today I'm happy to have Wesley Ho from Napp Studio, who is one of the artists who designed and created an installation for the festival. So the artwork is called Rhythmic Lane and it's based in Leung Sheung Wan. So I hope I pronounced it right. But yeah, so Wesley is here. Thanks a lot for joining, Wesley. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. Yeah, I'm Wesley Ho from Napp Studio. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for joining us. So to kickstart, do you mind to introduce yourself about yourself and also Nap Studio?
Sure. So Napp Studio is a practice that I co-founded with Aaron Zhang. We were classmates at Hong Kong U. And then later I went to GSD to finish my master degree. And then I worked in New York OMA for a bit, and then Hong Kong KPF before I completely become self-employed and started our own studio. And Napp Studio originally focused a lot on exhibition design. Our first project is actually an exhibition for the M Plus Museum.
Hmm.
And then later on, we started to work a lot with cultural institutions and galleries like Daegun or Oil Street in Hong Kong and PMQ. And we collaborated with a lot of different artists around the world. And in recent year, we also started to take on more architectural projects and interiors, like museum interiors in Bali and like a medical center in Hong Kong. And the Saigon Hoi Arts Festival is one of the main kind of outdoor art installation that we collaborated with a local group called Fragrant Village. They did a lot of community engagement about rural living in Hong Kong, even though it's like a very dense city, but Hong Kong, do have like 70% of the land that is like completely rural and
Hmm.
country parks. And it also used to be like a fishing village and also with lots of local village culture. So there's this kind of resurgence about like what rural living and the heritage in Hong Kong means and how those history contributes to the current development of a metropolis.
Thanks a lot. I look up to the Instagram of Nap Studio, and most of the projects are, I mean, even though it's small scales, but they are full of the thoughtful process and also details. It's very interactive as well, so it's not just a visually appealing, but it's also involve user movement, which we will talk more about the Nap Studio's work at for the festival. And I noticed, I mean, the first question I would like to ask is, looking into all the works that you have produced previously, how does it, what's the similarity that you find when you were doing the previous projects and also this particular project that you designed for the festival? Because looking into branching bench and also accordion album, there's a certain similarity in terms of form, but what about the process? Would it be something similar or would it be different? Because this time is much more dealing with community and it's much more, I would say the stakeholders are way broader compared to the two projects that I mentioned.
Yes, I think the previous two projects we did more like a general community project. We don't have like a super specific target group. But for this festival, because we have like a very specific site, which is at the Leung Sheung Wan Public School, which is one of the village schools that got shut down a few years ago. Because basically there are no longer like many residents living in that area. Everyone moved back into the city. In a way, we really have to engage with the 4 different local villages there and the fishermen who still have some sort of fishing activities and fish farming going on in the area. So this process become like the origin of the projects. Basically, it's like, what does this school mean to those people who used to live there, and also all the alumni that have already left? Because they're like, some of the people who used to study in that school is not even in Hong Kong, like some in UK, in Canada, in Australia. But what is interesting is we find that whenever we mention about this project and how we want to celebrate the memories and history of this school, everyone will seem so excited. And they are very willing to share like what they feel about the school and what the experience were like when they were studying in a village school, because it's not a huge school, it's not like the school that we know these days. Is
Mm,
only has like a few classrooms, and also the structure of education is also very different because it's a village school, the teaching staff is also very limited, so they kind of combine different years together within one classroom environment for the different classes too, which is very unusual. But then everyone kind of knows each other because it's such a tight community in that area. So after school or during recess, then everyone will go to play around in the basketball court, which is the site of our project. And also the kind of topography of that site is interesting too, because the school is kind of like on a higher ground.
mm,
And then there's almost like a cliff condition, and then that's the basketball court. And then you have like an 180 kind of sea view of the Leung Sheung Wan, the High Island Bay, which is also like super nice because I didn't even know there's such kind of high quality of seawater and clean
mm.
beach in Hong Kong. And you can see the seaweed and fish underwater, which is really amazing. So all these become like a very important element that we try to pull together into the art piece this time.
Mm. I mean, also you mentioned about the history about the place, and also now specifically the artwork called Rhythmic Lane is placed in the basketball court, if no mistaken.
Yes.
So you mentioned about the condition of the school where it's kind of abandoned in a way, and also not using anymore. So
Mm.
I'm quite curious about the inspiration and what kind of maybe oral collection or the data. How do you get that when the place is abandoned? So how do you sort of imagine the sound, especially as the main um the main element of the artwork. So would
Yeah.
you like to tell us about, especially when it comes to the engagement with the local community, because perhaps the so-called you mentioned about the school bells that might be the same from what you experienced when you're little, but and in different part, and then how does it relate to the this project specifically?
Yes. So we work with Fragrant Village on the community engagement part. Si, who is one of the founder, she like talked to try to reach out to all these villages and village heads. So when we were talking to them, first of all, because Fragrant Village is kind of like a group that study a lot about rural village school songs. And then were trying to combine in a way like music with architecture together on this art piece. So the very first thing that we thought about is, oh, maybe we should interview all these old people who used to study here and
Mm,
see like if there's a school song that we can use and translate into an installation. But then turns out because that school doesn't really have a school song, and but then everyone do remember the school bells, which is very special because it's not like anything digital or mechanical.
mm,
It is by like it is like by manual. So someone will hit like a oxygen tank thing, and then with like a very specific rhythm, and then everyone will know, oh, it's like class time or it's recess time. So we literally took that rhythm and translate it into that piece. So the very first thing that we have is actually not any melody, but it's a very specific rhythm that we have. So in a way, the piece you will see is also based on that rhythm, which is like a long and short kind of beat. And then when you have that any kind of sphere that you can roll on top, it kind of hits and create a sound of that rhythm. So the whole thing becomes like a very kind of percussion based instead of melodic based experience. But then what more we're trying to create in that piece is then we also start to talk to a lot of these villages, and then they will kind of share like one or two like key sentence or messages that they want for the school, and a lot of them are related to how they used to play, or like how they used to go to school, or like what the school means to them. So then we kind of engrave these texts, or like, and those becomes like an archive that's on each of the plank of that piece. So the piece kind of is like a meandering kind of bench, but at the same time, it is like a xylophone in a way, that has that rhythm. But at the same time, if you look closer, then one side is full of these messages of these old alumni who shared with us their memories of the school. But then also we have these different workshops with the community. So they were trying to kind of create a school song that is based on the rhythm of the school bell. And that was based on like the structure, the typical structure that Fragrant Village has been documenting across Hong Kong village schools. So basically in a typical rural village school songs, they have 4 different parts, and some part is usually about the geographic location and the surrounding, and then it will be about like the school pedagogy, and then like how like the people like activities, and then like what they were feeling, and then at the end usually is about like some kind of blessing or ambition the school is trying to achieve. So we kind of gave these 4 main parts to the local community, and also the rhythm, and then we kind of work with them, and they kind of give us all the lyrics, and then we also engrave it on another end of the piece. So in a way, the piece have 2 layers of information. One part is really the different messages of individual alumni. So we even engrave their names and the year of graduation on there. But then on the other end is like the big Chinese characters that got engraved, and according to also the rhythm of the piece. So then when people and visitors came, they can also like put on different kind of spheres that we have, or even their own ones. And when they roll it on top, then it creates that sound. And one thing that we find super interesting too is by using different kind of materials for the sphere, because of how it hit on the wood plank, it actually creates a different sound effect. At one point, we were even like completely kind of joking about it, and we put a ping pong and we thought it will bounce off, but actually it doesn't, and it creates like a very interesting vibration, and it's like an echo thing going on, which was like completely unexpected. Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about this artwork is sort of like you say, it's a meandering process, and also the movement of the sphere, or the object of the ball that hits the wood planks, and that's one kind of movement interact between objects. But there's also another movement that we don't see, which I mean, I'm sure there are some photos there where people actually moving around and
Yeah.
around the artwork that engage with the artwork. Now it sounds like the installation is kind of like a frozen melody or rhythm that embedded and took inspiration from the school bell and also the oral history of the community, or the people, or the so-called the students who used to study there. Like you said, that do you mind to repeat again and tell us more about the words that I saw on the website, where there are few Chinese character that's sort of engraved at the corner. So are those words or interviews or lyrics?
Yeah, so basically for each plank, you will see you can actually walk around a piece on either side, and then you ended up reading a slightly different part of the collective memory that we collected throughout the oral history engagement process. On one end with the smaller characters, but you will see like different phrases. Those are actually from different alumni of the school, and then they were trying to share anything that they want about the school that they studied, like, and also their experience about maybe the basketball court or the teachers or the classroom environment, or some very interesting one is about how they go to school, because not everyone there lived on land at that time. There are four like villages on land, but there are also fishermen. And there's some super interesting story that they shared is like when they approach the school, it's almost like from every different directions. The fishermen will approach the school with a boat, then they kind of dock near the shore side, and then they need to hike up a little bit, while the other villagers will be hiking down from the mountains or like along the shoreline. So the experience of how they approach the school is very unique. And there are also like someone who shared like, because for the fishermen, the parents sometimes will go out to the open sea to fish, and they will not be around for a long period of time, and they will suddenly come to pick up their kids because they cannot just leave them there. So some of these students will suddenly got like called out because they need to pick them up, and it's time to go out to fish, and then they will be missing school. So there were all these super interesting kind of experience that you don't really see or experience in schools these days. And it's really tied to the culture and the history of that location. Um, so that's one side of the thing. But then on the other side with the bigger characters, there are actually 5 different versions of school songs that we co-created the five with the 4 villages and the fishermen. So they kind of all got engraved onto the other side with a bigger character. So the bigger character, the way that we engraved is really following the rhythm. So when you put a ball there, you can actually sing along with that rhythm as the ball is rolling by like really following each kind of character. Sometimes on one playing there will be 2 characters, sometimes it's one, and then it's that beat that like you just follow that beat and then you just say it out, and then it kind of flows through, and then it becomes a school song. And at one point when we were doing the media tour, actually C from Fragrant Village, who did a lot of these engagement with the community, she actually sing it out loud with with that rhythm and the lyrics. So that then you start to hear the melody a bit, but it was not really intentional in a way. I also think because Cantonese have such like very specific tones. We have like 10 tones, if I remember it correctly. So then by saying the words out loud, it automatically forms a melody, even though the original piece only has that rhythm based on the school song. Oh, the school bell. So yeah, I think that was the interesting part.
Yeah, and also I think looking I mean what I find really interesting is also looking from the so-called x-axis and y-axis, the horizontal side where you have almost like a snake-like structure, and it's not in a linear form. But looking into the verticality of it, you can see the panels are actually not in the same height. There's a different thickness or different kind of a gap that is fragmented in a sense that is accommodating with the rhythm and also the melody that you draw inspiration from. I find it very interesting in that the shape of the artwork, and also you mentioned about this kind of a multi-layer of language intertwined with the song, and also maybe song or just sound in general
Yeah.
that created this artwork. So I'm quite curious about the reaction from the user, and what do they. I mean, it must be quite a refreshing one, because I think for the general public who might be surprised to see how music, which is something intangible, translated into tangible as an artwork.
Yeah, I think when people get there, they find super interesting because in a way, even though it looks like a bench, but some of the height is much taller. Like clearly it's not like some part of it is not for seating. And it's kind of true because we kind of make it the two ends really tall, so then the balls start to fall down. And then only in the middle part is actually at around the bench height, and people can actually sit on top and look out into the ocean because in a way, we also want people when they follow through the song and the lyrics, then they ended up with a place to rest and they can really experience the space and the nature there and the environment. So the middle part is really just a typical bench that got merged into that musical installation. But at the same time, it also collect all these spheres that got rolled down into the middle lowest part. And I think a lot of people they were super excited about the sphere because we don't make the sphere out of any traditional kind of materials that you're used to when you're playing sports. So we deliberately try to pick different materials with different density. So the densest one is actually like a stone sphere, and then we also have different kind of woods. And so when you are picking like those different spheres, they actually roll onto it with different speed too. And then people also like put on it at different intervals sometimes. So then they start to echo each other and then they create like another layer of experience. And I think people find it super interesting at one point that suddenly it's not just really about a single layer of rhythm, but they can create a different experience by placing the balls differently in different locations and different time. And then it generated like a very specific and unique experience, which then also touch upon like how the piece is not just something that you kind of press a button and then trigger something, but it has that another layer of co-creation happening. It's like people could actually customize the sound experience by placing different sphere and at different times at different location. And also like imagine if like there's a group of people which happened and everyone is always trying to put on the sphere, then it somehow doesn't really create like a very chaotic experience. When there are so many sphere, we realize like it almost sound like raindrops. It's like that water kind of flow kind of sound that you hear, and then and it kind of echoes with the sound of the waves of the ocean too. And it becomes super interesting. And also because the piece have this variation in height. For some people, like some of the portal, like some part of it, when it becomes so tall, then they don't find it as an obstacle, but they start to go underneath the piece to go across it, or some pieces they will climb over. And then I imagine like for some kids, it might even be more interesting because suddenly like some part really becomes almost like a bridge, and then some part it becomes like a tunnel situation. So yeah, I think it has that kind of very multi-layer spatial experience apart from the
Mm,
sound too,
mm.
because of the very unique form.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to the point where you mentioned about the school itself is almost like a center point for the four villages.
Yes.
And that's where they gather around in a way, because I can imagine the villages are tend to be more secluded and also quite sparse in a sense, and where the amount of school are actually quite limited. Otherwise, they wouldn't come to one place to study together. There's no point for them to travel all the way to one specific location. So the meaning of that school and its job location or architecture itself, it serves a rather imprinted memory for those who used to study there, and also the journey to travel to the place. I wanted to go back to talk about the site itself. When you mention, I mean, in the on the website, it says that the playground itself is served as a community informal gathering space. And I mean, because it's a basketball court, is and I find your artwork is sort of resonate with this idea of play and the idea of engagement. So my question would be, what you have experienced, may it be in US or in Hong Kong, different part of Hong Kong. Um, I mean, how did you ended up here in this, which react to the idea of play, and why? I mean, you could have just done a artwork that is not, it's just purely looking at it rather than playing with it. It's almost like
Yeah.
interacting with it. I'm just curious the idea of play and how much it meant for you. May it be from your perspective of your childhood, or it might be
Mm-hmm.
for the visitors, or may it feel for the local residents. The idea of play is which is very interesting for you to define.
Yes, I think playing on this art piece is very important, not just because the site itself is the basketball court, but it's because we find play is a very direct means to engage all the different villages at the time when the school is still operating. Because High Island Bay or Leung Sheung Wan, it used to be really an island, even though now it's called bay, because before the government built a reservoir and they connected with the mainland with the two dams, it was like a completely isolated island. So this is the only school on the island, and then all the different villages and the fishermen are scattered at different parts. So every day, like people will kind of gather at this place. And when we were also listening to them sharing about their experience of the school, a lot of them came to school primarily not to study. Actually, they were really like they came here to play. And then it's always about, and they share a lot about like all these different games that they play. And one of them was these glass marbles that they play a lot apart from basketball. And so then we also thought about, oh, how do we bring in the idea of like sphere or these marbles that they used to play into this piece? And at the same time, like because everyone was still talking about the school bell, so then how do we relate these two things together? Um, and one other thing is because they have also like very different backgrounds. And like some of them will be relying like, and also like different village actually rely on slightly different means of making a living. Some of them are like in agriculture, but some of them are like fishing, and then some of them is kind of like in between, so do something that's related to both land and sea resources. So but then the only thing that's in common is like all these games that they used to share and play. So play becomes a really key element to unify everyone in this on this island. And we really try to kind of reinterpret it in a way that is not just like a direct copy or like a remake of these old games, but we really try to turn it into something else. And one way to do it is really by linking the sphere, which kind of echoes the old marbles that they used to play, with the music that is kind of embedded based on the school bell, that relates to everyone's memory of this place. Yeah.
I mean, that's good. Thanks a lot. I mean, that sounds like. I mean, I'm trying to. It will be very interesting. I mean, compared to what you mentioned over, voice over this podcast. I think in the actual experience with the piece, it will be very different. That is almost sometimes not couldn't be comprehended. So
Yeah.
that's very interesting. Thanks a lot, for, Wesley. So my last question would be, was there any limitations? And also, I'm quite curious about the design process when you were I mean, you yourself and your team were very particular on, I mean, the sound, the music, and everything is a very broad topic, and it could have just, withdraw or derive the idea from the the sea, the sound from the sea, or it might be from different kind of texture, it might be from the rocks or anything. But this time seems like the artwork is more focusing on the school bell, and also it relates to the local context of that the site of the art installation. So I'm quite curious about the limitation, and also what were the challenges in doing such project, because I think this question is not imposing on just this art installation. I think it's also applies to most of the projects that you do. You have to be very, very specific on one kind of layers of a certain
Yeah.
idea that you mentioned about. There are a few layers or of music that sort of intertwine with the oral interviews that sort of make it more richer. So I'm quite curious to know about that. I think for the listeners who wanted to pick something up not just from the meaning of the artwork, but also the deliverables and also the logistic of the artwork.
Yes, the most challenging part is really the logistics, because even though now it's no longer an island, but the way to access the site, there is no direct transportation. And then also like you really need to hike a long way down even from the dam and then to the site. So when we were creating this piece, we already know like the fabrication process that we did will have to be kind of divided into different prefab sections.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is one thing that we always kind of think about for outdoor installation is maintenance, because that piece will stay there for more than a year, which will definitely go spend across the typhoon season in Hong Kong. And so at one point we did think about like, oh, should we create the piece completely out of metal, like stainless steel or something? But then we realized like the sound of stainless steel is not very approachable in a way. It could be quite kind of screechy, and also it gives that very cold surface, and people will not want to kind of touch it or like sit on it when it's like cold in winter in Hong Kong. So we still try to use wood for the main surface. And also, when you think about it, for a lot of the musical instruments, the very traditional ones are all wood ones. And I think there is certain kind of coziness of that sound in wood instrument that is different from the metal ones. And so we ended up using wood again, and the wood that we were using are ash wood. And we also need to apply like a very special coating that people usually use for doing decks of boats and sails. So then it becomes more weatherproofed and it won't get mold after it get wet and like but through rain and stuff. Um, and then for the fixing part, we also have been testing a few. We did like mock-ups to do it, because by using different means to fix that wood plank, you actually affects the sound, like of how, like when the ball hits on it, like sometimes it will become completely muted. It got fixed too much and it becomes very stiff. So then there's no more vibration. So in a way, we have tested different kind of interface, like what kind of materials we should be using. And we ended up with like there's actually like a plastic part in between. So then it gives like some kind of flexibility between the steel kind of main structure, the footing, and the wood plank. So then when the ball hits, it still have that leeway for it to move along. And we also have been studying like the shape of the wood plank, because when it got thicker, thinner, longer, shorter, it affects not only the rhythm, but the pitch that is created. So like when you look at the piece, even though like we don't have like a very specific melody, but you can tell like the sizing and then the thickness and the length of it actually controls the rhythm, and that keep on repeating across the central spine of it. So that is kind of like the fixed kind of quantitative element of the piece, even though it looks very organic, but the middle distance is like highly controlled and calibrated based on the school bell. And that's something that we have been studying because it ties really tightly to the geometry and the shape of the piece and how it can fit inside a basketball court. So also one very interesting thing is because it's still a basketball court, part of the shape of the piece is actually following the very traditional basketball court lines, like those circles and spheres that you find on basketball courts. So if you're looking at it, sometimes they overlap completely with those court lines, while sometimes they span across it. Um, yeah, so that is kind of like an in between. So yeah.
Do they try to play basketball along with the installation as well?
I'm not sure, but yeah, but
It, mi-
yeah,
it might
that
sound like
could
a
be.
it might sound
Yeah.
like a disaster, but yeah.
It's likely to be.
But I mean, thanks a lot. I mean, that's really, I mean, immediately when I look into the close-up that the photos or the video posted on Napp Studio Instagram, I reminds me of Princess Diana Memorial installation at Hyde Park, London. So it's kind of
Oh,
like CNC surface, and then but the artwork is about the movement of the water rather than, I mean, in this case the movement of the sphere that produce the sound. And I find it's very interesting. It's very, very delicate job in this must be, because you need to control the speed of the ball and
yes.
how does it interact with the sound. I can't imagine. I'm quite excited to see the working drawing and how does it relate to that. It must be quite interesting.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of hands-on mock-up that we did with one of our long-term fabrication partners, Screw Up Studios. Screw Up is also like a very, very small carpentry workshop in Hong Kong. They were our friends. Basically they're a couple, and then they created like a lot of super nice woods and metal craft work for us for many different projects before. But this time is the only one that is no longer just about usage, function, and ergonomics, but it's
Mm,
really, it has that sound layer which none of us is an expert. So we really were testing like, oh, how much the drop needs in order to create that sound and it's loud enough for you to hear in that context. Because if it drops too much, then the ball becomes so fast that it will roll off. But if it drops too little, then it's so soft that you don't hear it. So there was like a long process of testing. We actually still kept the tiny mock-up version in our office.
mm.
Yeah, and I remember the first time we saw the mock-up at the fabrication lab, it was super interesting because we were literally testing anything that we can roll on top of that surface, not just spheres, but like random objects or even like pencils or like rubber and like anything. Yeah, and they all actually create very interesting sound, though some of it will got stuck in the middle. But yeah, still. So at one point we were also thinking, oh, should we create like a community engagement event that is called like BYOB, it's like bring your own ball, and then you just kind of give anything that you want to roll on top and just try it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they are more than welcome to bring their own beer or bottle if they want. It'll be quite fun, I suppose. But anyway, thank you very much, Wesley. This is a very wonderful sharing from your side, and also I find the artwork is very inspiring as well. It it resonates. It's a lot of layers. It's almost like the multiverse of elements that capture in one artwork that I can imagine is not easy. It must be quite a complicated one, to intertwine with the sound and also the technical side and also the history and also the oral documentation from the people, and also how does it relate to architecture in the end. It's sort of captured in one. So well done, and thanks a lot, Wesley.
Thank you, Gary.
So I think that's all from us. And if you're interested, feel free to visit Saigon Hoi Art Festival website or even Napp Studio Instagram for more. So thanks again, Wesley.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
All right, see you then.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.